This program is brought to you by Grand Valley State University.
Okay, good morning. My name is Hans. So we are on the third module out of the 6 modules that we prepared. So what we will learn in the third module is to learn more about the user interface, about the Android user interface. And we assume that you've been using Java for a while, so you know more about Swing. So from time to time, I will compare the UI concepts that you will learn in Android with Swing concepts like JPanel, JComponent, JButton. And the 2 main building blocks in Android UI are view and view group. So what is a view? Well, if you're familiar with Swing, view is like JComponent. So that's like the basic GUI component that you can build in Swing. So basically, a view is a data structure that holds all information about a rectangular area on the screen. Maybe like the size, the width, the height, or the location, or the background color. So whatever you need to include in a rectangular area. And the other building block is a view group. So you can combine a number of views into bigger views to make a more interesting view. So a simple example will be like a button is a view. A text box is a view. A checkbox is a view. But you can combine views, several views together into a view group. So we're going to look at that later as more examples you will see here. So if you think of a JPanel in Swing, so a view group is like a JPanel. So a JPanel is a container that can hold a number of JComponent. So same thing with Android. A view group is a container that can hold a number of child views. So this is like an example of how views can be constructed into a bigger view. In Swing, if you remember that anytime we need to include a simpler component, we need a JPanel. And with a JPanel, you need to associate a layout manager. But in Android, you don't have to set up a layout manager because a view group is practically a layout, as you can see like later in my example. So John already showed you how to create a Hello World application with a simple component, a text field, a text box that shows Hello World text. And in this application, we're going to extend more feature here. We're going to include more components, button, text box, and a button. Then you can respond. You can create a dialogue, a simple dialogue here. And how do you show the view from the layout? Well, as John showed you before, we need to build like a layout in XML file. And then in your onCreate method, you need to call set content view. And as you recall that if you look at the dot notation here, r.layout.main, the dot notation is similar to the directory structure under the resource directory. So you see like the res/layout/main. So this is the simple layout that we used before. So the Hello World string. So basically what we have is a linear layout. So in Swing, a linear layout is like a box layout. So if you remember in Swing, we have either vertical box or a horizontal box. So this will be an example of a vertical box layout. And text view is a child of this linear layout. Well, how do we know that this is a child? Well, you can see from the structure, the starting tag is here, linear layout, and the ending tag is down here, and text view is within those 2 tags. So the text view is a child of the linear layout. And as John explained before, like the height of this text view is will be as wide as the parent. And in our case here, the parent will be the entire screen. The linear layout will be the entire screen. So how many different layouts we can use in Android application? Well, these are just some examples, and you will see more on the Android website, android.com. The first one here, we have like a linear layout. So in order to build a screen like this, at least you need to use 2 linear layouts. And the first one is to hold the boxes, the red, green, blue, and yellow boxes. And you will use a horizontal linear layout here. And to hold the entire screen, you need a vertical linear layout. So one view to hold the horizontal boxes, but then you will enclose the 5 components into a vertical layout. And the other kind of layout that we can use is a relative layout. So the nice thing about relative layout is it's more compact, more concise. It takes less resources than a linear layout. And why we use a relative layout? With a relative layout, we can specify the relative placement of components inside a layout. So for instance, I can say that I have a text box here, and the text box is below the text type here. And I want to place a button, the OK button, and the OK button is below the text box. And I can also tell Android view system that the OK button should be right aligned with the parent screen. And the cancel button is to the left of the OK button. So we can include attributes in our XML file to specify relative positions of components. And another example of the layout is a table layout. So with a table, basically, what you need to build is a table layout will hold a number of table rows, and the one table row will hold a number of views. So in our example on the screen here, we have a table layout, and the first row holds 2 text fields, open and control O. And this table holds like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. And another example that I can show you here is a grid view, tab layout, and list view. So a grid view is practically a list view, but the content are displayed in a 2D, two-dimensional grid instead of like a one-column arrangement here. So this is an example of images that you can place into a grid view. And with a list view, we can scroll up and down. Same thing with a grid view, we can also scroll up and down. And a tab layout provides a number of tabs that you can select from. You can switch from one tab to another, and will show a different view inside the area of the screen here. Now, what are the common widgets that we can use? Well, typically we need a button, we need a checkbox, we can include radio buttons, we can include date, picker dialog, color, picker dialog, text fields. So in our next project here, we will show you how to include more widgets to make the application more interesting, and we can interact with the application. So these are some examples of different dialogues that you can use. You can select a date. Now you can see like a date is practically 3 components, 3 composite views, and each one of the composite view consists of 3 simpler views. So like a text field here, and with two buttons, the plus and the minus buttons. And we have like buttons here, two buttons, set, cancel. So as you can see, like we can build a more complicated view from simple views. So another example of dialog is a time picker dialog. And you can combine different views into a screen, into a bigger view. So you can put like an image view, you can put it text box, checkbox, and a number of different views in your activity, in your screen. More example, a spinner. With a spinner, you can, this is like a checkbox in Swing. So if you click on this button, it will pop different options that you can pick from. And another example of a widget that you can use is an autocomplete. So with an autocomplete, basically there's a text field that will give you options depending on what you type on the text input area. So this is an example of name of places. So far we type CA, and all the options that begins with CA will pop up, and then from there you can select one of the options by clicking your mouse or by touching the screen. And gallery is another example. This is like an image of something like a beach image, I think. Map view is an interesting view for an Android application, because it will load the map tiles depending on where you are. You can zoom in, zoom out. You can do a search in a typical map application. And a web view is another example. This is basically a text view, but with an enhanced feature that will render any standard HTML tags. So if you put like a bold tag in your web view, it will show as a bold. If you put an A tag, it will show up as a hyperlink, and so on and so forth. So let's start with a demo here. So what I'm going to do is I will run the demo first, so you can see what the app is doing. So I'm going to click Run As Android App. Let me switch to the emulator. Apparently it has been running. So this is like the new app, the second version of the app, beyond the Hello World. So what we have here is a text box and a button. So there's a hint provided by the app to type your name. So what we're going to see is when we type the name and we hit the OK button, then a short dialogue, a short message will pop up on the screen. So let's do that. So let's type a name here. We have a lady in the audience. So I'm going to type her name. And then if I click OK, and you will see down here in the screen, it says hello, the name that we type. So how do we go beyond the simple Hello World application to make the application more interactive? First of all, what we need to do is we need to modify the layout, the main XML file that we used before. So let's take a look at the layout. So this is the layout, the new layout. Now, you can see that we have two layout tags. One is the outer tag, a linear layout, and there is like an inner, a linear layout tag. And as you can see from the structure, nesting helps you to see the overall structure of the layout here. So inside the inner linear layout, you see two views. The first one is an edit text, and then the second one is the button. Let me go back to the screen. So we have a text and we have a button, and we put the two views in a horizontal linear layout. So that's what you see in your XML file. So the linear layout, the inner linear layout has an orientation attribute of horizontal. Now, the two views here, the edit text, we must provide a unique ID. So we call it like username for the text area, and we call it the BTN OK, the OK button. So whenever you click, what we want to do in our application is whenever you click the OK button, we will show the input username here in a short message. So how do we do that? Well, we need to look at the activity, and under the activity, we add more lines, we add more logic in the onCreate method. So before, what you saw in the first version of the app is just 2 lines, the super onCreate call and then the set content view. But now we want to go beyond the 2 lines that we had in our previous version. So what we need to do here is we need to get a handle of all the views that we use in our layout. Why? Well, we need to know the content of the username. We need to be able to respond to the OK button. So that's why we need to get a handle to the button and to the input text. How do we get the handle from a layout in your activity? So there's a method which is inherited from the activity class. This method is called findViewById. Well, what we need to provide as the parameter of this method is the ID, the unique ID of the views that we include in the layout. So let me go back to the layout. Now, if you remember that what we use as the ID of the edit text is @+ID/user_name. Okay. So basically, this is like a new resource, while the plus between the @ sign and ID is telling the plugin that the plugin should create a new resource. And this resource will be like used to grab the handle from within the onCreate method. So, and the second component, the button, has a unique ID of @ID BTN_OK. So now if you remember the name, the unique ID that we use in the XML file, we have to use exactly the same ID when we call the findViewById, except we use the dot notation. So because the username is an ID, so we type r.id.user_name. Okay. But the good thing about Eclipse plugin is you don't have to memorize all these names, because with the auto complete feature built into Eclipse, if you just start typing r.id. then Eclipse will prompt you with possible completion of the ID that are given in your XML file. So once we call the 2 methods findViewById, then we will get a handle. Well, in order to get the proper handle, you need to know the type of the view. So the first view that we need is an edit text. So that's why you need to cast the return value from findViewById to an edit text. But for the second one, the button is a button type. So instead of typing to an edit text, we need to typecast the return value from findViewById into a button type object. So we get the handle, but then how do we use the handle to make the program more interactive? Well, if you remember in Swing, we need to use listeners. And the way to do it in Swing is you will say something.add action listener, something.add window listener. So this is similar what we have in Eclipse, but instead of add something action listener, so we will say the name of the handle, the button, set on-click listener. So basically, we are telling the Android view system that when the mouse is clicked on the button, we want to respond to this action, the user request. So how do we do that? In order to be able to respond to your user click here, we need to provide a handler. Well, a handler is a click listener handler. And how do we define a click listener handler? Down here, we have the definition of the OK handler. And this is a new object of type onClick listener. And the only method that we need to provide inside the onClick listener is the onClick method. So if you remember, like in Swing, for instance, if you use an action listener, you need to provide an action performed method. This is exactly similar style that we need to use in your Android application. So with the onClick method, the onClick method takes a parameter of type view. So with the parameter v that you get from the onClick method, you will be able to use one handler to respond to several buttons, for instance. So you can use an if statement inside, but we don't need that for this application because this application is very simple. So what we want to do, if you remember what we did, is when you click the button, then we want to pop up a short message. And how do we do that? There's like a simple method under the Toast class. This is a utility class that provides methods for showing short messages on your screen. So the name of the method is makeText, because you want to prompt a short text message here. And how do we get the username that we type on the text box? Well, let me go back to the onCreate method. So the onCreate method gets the handle of the username, and the handle is now stored into an instance variable m_username. So that's how we get the actual text from the screen that you type into the application. So the name of the handle here, m_user_name, and then there's a method that you can call to get the actual text inside the text box. So now if you combine the hello string that we define in the resource file, so John mentioned about how to use the resource file. I'm not going to go over that again. And if you combine the hello string with the username, and then you will use the makeText method and then show the text. So that's a very simple one. So you know how it works. Now another feature that I'm going to show you is how to respond to the menu button. So let me go back to the emulator. So one nice thing about Android apps is that it can pop up a menu whenever the user clicks the menu button. So let me show you what you will see here. Whenever you click the menu button, then a menu will pop up. So how do you make a new menu? So the menu is very simple. We want to exit the application. There's one menu item. So how do we make the menu item here? So there are two methods that you want to include in order to handle menus in your Android app. So the first one is onCreate options menu, and the second one is onOptions selected. So the function that John mentioned in his previous presentation. So it's very common to see the on method. You will see more about the on-hook methods here. So the first onCreate option menu will be implicitly invoked by the view system anytime you press the menu button. So this is the logic that we need to create a menu. What I'm showing you here is a very simple menu, which is a text menu. We can include images in the menu, but we don't do that here. just a simple text, and the text will say exit. So that's a simple one. And with each menu item, we need to assign a unique ID. And here we are using like an integer unique ID, exit_ID. And exit_ID is an integer variable that you declare as part of your application. So remember, it has to be unique number. So then Android menu class provides with a constant that you can use to define your unique ID for your menu. So like menu.first is a number. We don't care to know the actual value of the number, but we know that it will be a unique number. So if you use like more than one menu items, what you need to do is declare another integer with a new ID, and you can say final private int. So let's say I'm going to make a help menu here. Well, it has to be unique. So the simple one that you can do is just say previous ID plus 1. So if you want to make the third menu item, just do the same, but now exit ID plus 2. That will do the trick for you. So this is the method that will get called whenever you press the menu button. But now when the user selects one of the menu items, then another method will be invoked by the Android view system. So the next method here, on options item selected, and it will tell you the item that was selected by the user, and I want to make different actions depending on what menu item was pressed. So for our application, the switch statement is redundant because we have only one, but if you include more than one menu item, then you can add another case label here, down here, so then you can do a different action whenever the user is either clicking the exit or the help menu item. So that's a simple one. And what we want to do with the exit menu item is just to stop the app. And the easy way to stop your application in Android is to call finish. The finish method will stop, and then when the application is finished, then it will go back to whatever activity that called your activity. So that's a very simple one. So let me show you how it works. So if I click the exit button, then of course it will go back to the previous activity, because this is the activity that we saw before we run our intro activity. So that's a very simple application that we can enhance from the first version of the application. So what we have learned here is how to use the UI, different UI, and how to include different layout. So in our example before, we used like a nested linear layout inside another linear layout. Of course, you can make your application more fancy if you need to include more layout of different kind. And the way you declare the structure of your user interface is through the XML file. That's an easy way to define the UI structure. And we show you how to make the application more interactive by defining the listeners, the on-click listeners. And that's basically a few enhancements that we include in the second version of the application. So in the next module, we will do more. We will see how we can get data from the network and include more features, more interesting features in your application.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Grand Valley State University. Visit us at gvsu.edu.